Topse sto Kotsen Hall, Yanasine Kisume, Ton But I would like to express our gratitude especially to the trustees of the American School of Classical Studies and the overseers of the Gennadius Library for their bedrock confidence and steadfast vision. I thank Director Maria Yorgopoulou and Head Librarian Irini Solomonidi for leading the library with the discernment and creativity that gives us the courage to think with energy and anticipation about how we may configure knowledge and education in the future. And I would like to thank all the staff of the school who have brought us to this celebratory moment so capably. I now turn to Maria Yorgopoulou, Director of the Gennadius, to introduce this evening's program. Maria.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. It is a great privilege and honor to stand once again here on the stage of Kotzen Hall to continue to these celebrations to mark the centennial of the Gennadius Library. And at the heart of this moment of 100 years ago was an extraordinary act of generosity. In 1926, Ioannis Gennadios entrusted his collection to the American School, a gift of books, but also his vision, one that affirmed the importance of Greece beyond antiquity and the value of preserving its intellectual and cultural heritage. The building itself that was conceived as a space of scholarship, reflection, and discovery. Over the past century, the Gennadios Library has become a vital center for the study of post-classical Greece, shaping generations of scholarship and deepening our understanding of the Greek world. And it has been the highlight of my professional career to serve as director of this institution since 2004. The past year, we have marked this milestone in meaningful ways. Not the past year, this past year. A few weeks ago, we opened our exhibition, Gennadios Library 100, A Century of Inspiration, that you can see at the Makrigiannis Wing on our campus here in Athens, and I hope that you will all find the time to visit. As we look ahead, our commitment is to share the library's knowledge as widely as possible through lectures, programs, and exhibitions, and we expect that all this will bring more and more people into the library, and hopefully, some people that have less gray hair than I do. At this moment, and with special thanks and gratitude to the Kalinikion Foundation, whose generosity made this production possible, it is my pleasure to introduce to you a new American School short film documentary entitled Gennadios Library, One Gift, His Vision, Our Future. It premiered 2 weeks ago in our gala in New York, and I'm happy to say that the director, Nikos Dayandas, is with us tonight. But obviously, as all the things we do at the American School, this is a team project, and I wanted to thank all of you, and many of you are in this room, trustees, overseers, and friends and colleagues who contributed in making this film. So may we have your attention. Thank you. To get to celebrate one's 100th birthday is obviously an exciting milestone, because you have to understand what it is that the institution has done, how it started and how it has changed. Οπότε εδώ έχουμε αντικείμενα που δείχνουν έτσι την αρχή της πορείας ακριβώς.
Φτιάχνεται μία έκθεση που είναι η μικρογραφία μιας βιβλιοθήκης, είναι η συλλογή, αλλά είναι και η ιστορία, είναι οι άνθρωποι της Γεναδίου από την αρχή μέχρι τώρα, οι δωρητές, είναι οι φίλοι της Γεναδίου, είναι οι επίτροποι της Γεναδίου που μας επιτρέψαν να έχουμε σπάνια πράγματα.
The Genadio started as a repository of an amazing collection of books. About 30,000 books that were donated by Ioannis Genadios. So what we have tried to do in the exhibition is to think of the vision of the founder and how this changed over time.
Ο Γενάδιος ανήκει στην πρώτη γενιά των Ελλήνων, οι οποίοι ζουν σε ένα ανεξάρτητο κράτος και ψάχνουν να βρουν τη θέση τους μέσα στον κόσμο. Έχασε τον πατέρα του σε πολύ νεαρή ηλικία. Επηρεάστηκε όμως βαθιά από τον άνθρωπο αυτόν, ο οποίος έχει μείνει γνωστός για τη συμβολή του στον αγώνα για την ανεξαρτησία, αλλά και την οικοδόμηση των πνευματικών και εκπαιδευτικών θεσμών της σύγχρονης Ελλάδας.
Genadios' father was a book collector, so he probably fell in love with books at an early age.
The upper middle class in Europe in the late 19th century revered learning because of the contribution it could make to national life. And so he began to collect at some point in the 1880s with that in mind. He'd moved to England before he was 20 to work with one of the great Anglo-Greek merchant dynasties of the time. And then he'd broken with them at the time of a very famous brigandage case in Greece, the Dilesi murders in 1870.
There were a group of Western travellers who were travelling in Greece, and they were kidnapped by bandits, and a ransom was sought, and in the process lives were lost.
So this creates a huge issue in the British press, and the Greeks are called barbarians. So Genadios, he's warned by his employers to stay out of it. And despite that, he sits down and writes a 109-page pamphlet, which he distributes to British parliamentarians, rebutting all these accusations. He loses his job as a consequence, but he becomes a national hero in Greece, and in a way that marks the course of the rest of his life.
Οπότε εδώ έχουμε έτσι ένα από τα δωμάτια της οικίας του Γεναδίου στο Λονδίνο. Αυτή η κούκλα εδώ που θα φορέσει την στολή, τη διπλωματική του Γεναδίου.
As a diplomat, he basically served his country before, during and after the First World War, a time of tremendous upheaval in the life of Hellenism.
He was one of the early champions of what we would today call cultural diplomacy. So he harnessed what Greece could offer through its culture, through its history. And he did so in a way that I think enabled him to get attention and to draw support from those he was engaging with in London society and elsewhere.
Ioannis Genadios tried to show through his writings in newspapers and through his book collection that the history of Hellenism had not died with the end of the Hellenistic period, against the grain of what British intellectual thinking was at the time.
The vision was of a Greece that had ceased to produce anything of interest after the end of the classical period. That was how many people in Western Europe understood Greece. That was what they went to Greece to see.
It was even still the case when I was a student. Many people didn't even want to go to the Hellenistic period, much less into Byzantium.
Without it, it's impossible to understand either what was before it or what came after it in this part of the world, the Mediterranean and Europe and the Middle East.
Genadios knew that was not right, not true. And so he did make it his mission to promote the contributions that the Byzantines made and transmitted to the modern European world.
His vision of Greece was comprehensive. It was a continuum from antiquity to the present day.
As he was getting old, he was worried about what was going to happen to his personal library. The Greek state, in the middle of the Greek-Turkish war, couldn't afford to build a library. In early 1922, John Genadios was in Washington, D.C., and there he sat with members of the managing committee of the American School of Classical Studies. He confided his problem about what to do with his precious library. Mitchell Carroll conveyed that to the chair of the managing committee of the American School, Edward Capps. Until then, the focus of the American School was the study of ancient Greece. And it's surprising that Capps was in favor of the acquisition. So the gift was made in 1922.
Here it is.
So the American School shall erect a special building for the reception and accommodation of the said library and collections.
To be called the Genadion, in remembrance of his father, George, the donor in token of his admiration and respect for the United States of America, and in the confident hope that the American School may be enabled to become a world center for the study of Greek history, literature, and art, both ancient, Byzantine, and modern.
And for the better understanding of the history and constitution of the Greek Church.
This is it. This is our lodestar.
Carnegie Corporation agreed to fund the construction of the Genadios Library, and then the building of the library was completed in 1926. We see a change in the mission of the school. Somebody coming to the school could study medieval Greece and modern Greece.
The initial gift from Ioannis Genadios pushed the American School and transformed it in a way that it now began to study and research and dedicate its resources to promoting, preserving, and protecting Greece's past from prehistory to present-day Greece.
In the 60s, this becomes more pronounced. The library is connected more with American academia. Peter Topping, he's interested in Frankish Greece. And then Francis Walton is a classicist who embraces the collection.
He wanted to make the library known outside of Greece, which was very important, because as a rare book library and as an amazing research library, it is the equal of collections like the Beinecke Library at Yale, people come here from all over the world to study and to do research.
My name is Hilal Cemile Tümer. I'm from Istanbul, and I'm doing my PhD in history at the University of California in Berkeley. My research is on the forced displacement and migration of the Muslims of Greece during the Greek War of Independence. Very few people are familiar with the experiences of these refugees. I aim to include as many perspectives as I can in my research. Here, there's just such a diversity of sources, from travelogues to memoirs of the Greek generals or chronicles, maps and plans of Athens and other places in the Peloponnese. All of them are housed here. And here in this book, even though it's about the ancient Greek ruins of Asia Minor, I encountered this very short description of the refugees, Muslim refugees who settled in Izmir, in this town called Sığacık. And it's vital for my research because it shows that these people still spoke Greek, even after they migrated from Greece.
My name is Fiona Antonelaki. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. My PhD research was on the poetry of George Seferis and Odysseus Elitis, and since the American School houses both their archives, I came here to find more material for my work. I saw that there was this vinyl record among Konstantinos Tsatsou's papers. These things you don't know until you see them, so it's always a surprise. This vinyl record captures the voice of Angelos Seferiadis, the younger brother of the poet George Seferis, whom we thought that we don't have on record. I was delighted that his voice actually survives.
What we celebrate is Greek identity. And one of the great aspects of Hellenism, it's its resilience and the way it changes, and the way that's reflected in costume, in food, in dialects, in music.
Ο ερωτόκριτος είναι αυτός. Ίσως όλοι οι κριτικοί να τον ξέρουν απ' έξω και να μπορούν να το τραγουδήσουν κιόλας τον ερωτόκριτο.
You have sound and music throughout the Gennadios library, where I can think of the interaction of people with the Erotokritos, the 17th century Cretan Renaissance novel in verse, which was later sung to music in Crete mostly, but all around Greece as well. So for me, working here, you have a way of knowing how people interacted with song. They would actually communicate through music, their news, their sentiments, their aspirations.
Welcome to the opening of the official celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the Gennadios Library. The library has grown, the researchers have multiplied, we have many more fellowships, we have programs where students are taught Byzantine Greek and paleography, and it's a library that is open. And this is something that Gennadios wanted.
It's been a wonderful experience to see this evolution of the library into what I believe Gennadios really envisioned, which is not simply a treasure house of this extraordinary material, that he deposited, but it's also this very human interactive community interested in engaging with how we're thinking about Greece today.
And I think it was one of the most moving moments in my years at the Gennadios. At the end of this concert, in our theater, which seats 400 people, people started dancing in the aisles. Who would have imagined this in a school of classical studies?
If we think of the Gennadios library as a book, then the first chapter is about Gennadios' original gift that made all of this possible. Today, however, is not the end of that book. The 100 years for us is just another chapter.
This is what we need to top up tonight. Over the 100 years of the Gennadios Library, this institution has relied on the support of many benefactors. And for the past 30 years, the Board of Overseers of the Gennadios Library has ensured the integrity of the building facilities, the enrichment of collections, the development of research programs and scholarships, and events open to the public. The chairman of the Board of Overseers, Andreas Zombanakis, has revitalized the board over the past 9 years, bringing fresh ideas for programs and events. As a Greek of the diaspora, with studies in archaeology, architecture, and business, Mr. Zombanakis is well-traveled. As Ioannis Gennadios would say, he's a traveler who is thirsty for knowledge, with a deep love for our culture and heritage. He strongly believes in the power of this culture and passionately seeks the components of our identity. His vision, like that of Gennadios himself, is a great Gennadios library that will open a dialogue with researchers, academics, and the wider library. Today, Andreas will be the moderator of our discussion under the title Academies and Society, which explores this evolving relationship between academic institutions and the societies that they serve, drawing on the expertise and of two very important speakers and thinkers that he will talk about. And the conversation will examine how the humanities and social sciences are responding to contemporary social, cultural, and educational pressures, including different perspectives from Europe, Greece, and the Anglo-American world, while they also reflect on their enduring value and relevance for future generations. Participants will also consider the impact of technological change on scholarship institutions and public life. And finally, the discussion will also cover, if there is time, the different models of philanthropy and the respective roles of state and private institutions. So without any further ado, I call Andreas Zombanakis on stage for the beginning of our discussion.
Yes, sit in the middle, I think.
What did we do?
Maria, thank you very much. It's been a great partnership working together all these years. You've been an amazing director, and you've been even just arranging this discussion, I think, is a tribute to your leadership. I was a bit intimidated initially about having to moderate a discussion between these two very eminent people. And then I saw you coming through the door, and I thought, okay, they're all friends, we'll be all right. So, even though we're competing with the Final Four tonight, you're all stalwarts. So, the subject of the discussion this evening, Academies and Society, is an apposite topic for an institution like the Gennadios Library that's celebrating its 100th anniversary. And we're not the only ones celebrating our 100th anniversary. So is the Academy of Athens. We were founded at about the same time, as indeed was the American Academy in Rome with the American School of Classical Studies. So that gives you a sense of what was going on in those times. So, since ancient times, academies have occupied a unique position between knowledge and public life, yet the relationship between intellectual institutions and society is changing rapidly. We live in a world of accelerating technology, contested expertise, political polarization, and shrinking attention spans. Information is abundant, but authority is becoming increasingly fragile. The question tonight that we're trying to address is whether institutions devoted to reflection, libraries, academies, research centers, are more or less important than they have been in the past. We're particularly fortunate today because our discussion brings together two institutions that embody very different traditions of intellectual life. One is a broadly focused national academy sustained to a large degree by the state, and the other, a more narrowly focused, independent, scholarly institution sustained through private support. One is part of a continental tradition, and the other of a more Anglo-Saxon tradition. These contrasts raise fascinating questions. What are academies for today? What obligations do they have to society? How does one sustain intellectual independence? And what role can such institutions play in shaping the future civic and cultural life of our societies? In exploring these questions, we're privileged to have with us two distinguished academics, Professor Nikiforos Diamandouros, President of the Academy of Athens, and Professor Peter Miller, Chairman and CEO of the American Academy of Rome. Professor Diamandouros received his PhD from Columbia University and is Emeritus Professor of Political Science and Public Administration at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Over the course of a distinguished international career, he also served as a visiting professor at the College of Europe and at the Center for Advanced Study in the Social Sciences of the Juan March Institute in Madrid. He served as European Ombudsman from 2003 to 2013, following this tenure as the first Greek Ombudsman, where he helped establish one of this country's most important independent institutions. He also served as the director and chairman of the board of the National Center for Social Research. Since 2014, he's been a full member of the Academy of Athens and today serves as its president. leading Greece's highest intellectual institution and one of the country's foremost centers of scholarship and public thought. Professor Diamandouros has been honored by the presidents of France, of Poland, and Greece, including receiving the Légion d'honneur and the Order of the Phoenix. His scholarly work has focused on democratization, institution, and the quality of democracy in Greece and across the southern and southeastern Europe. Before assuming this role as president of the American Academy in Rome, Professor Miller served for more than 2 decades as the Bard Graduate Center in New York, where he was both professor and dean from 2001 to 2023. His scholarship has profoundly shaped the study of intellectual history, antiquarianism, material culture, and the role of objects as historical evidence. He is the author of an important series of books on 17th century antiquarian Fabry de Pirsec, on the history of antiquarianism, and on the modern study of objects and collections. He's curated major exhibitions, including Dutch New York, Between East and West, The World of Margarita van Varik, and others. Among his recent and forthcoming books are The Weather on 9901, newspaper Weather Maps and History, Conservation as Human Science, and others. Professor Miller has held affiliations with many of the world's leading institutions, including the University of Cambridge, the University of Chicago, the Warburg Institute, the Berlin Institute for Advanced Study, and the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and the École Normale Supérieure. He's also been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation. So welcome to you both. These were long introductions, but these are very distinguished careers, so I think they deserved it. I'd like to start perhaps with asking you both to give a brief discussion about your institutions, about when and why they were founded, and what their role is today. Professor Diamandouros. Up. Let me see. Let's see here. Is this it?
Nope.
Can you hear?
You can.
Can we support?
My voice without a problem with the box there. There's a problem. Connection.
Oh, here we go.
I'll try that one. Yes,
Okay.
That deprives you of mine. I'll give you mine. Okay. Thank you very much for the very generous introduction. And I'm delighted to be given a chance to discuss with you on this topic. I'm very grateful to the director of the Academies, Mrs. Iropoulou, whom I've known for a number of years. I want to thank her for coming up with the idea of getting the two institutions that have a 100th anniversary, celebrating a 100th anniversary this year together for comparative purposes. Let me just say a couple of things about the Academy of Athens. It was established 100 years ago, regrettably during a time of military dictatorship, of which there were more than one in recent Greek history, but hopefully we passed that. That was that time when General Pangalos had a short-lived dictatorship. But it was the outcome of an effort of more than 100 years, because the first stirrings for the creation of the Academy came actually in the course of the War of Independence of the 1820s. The first concerted effort to set it up was done in the 1840s. But then, in the 19th century was a fairly turbulent century for Greece. And the whole thing was abated until none other than Eleftherios Venizelos, the great statesman of the first half of the century, while on mission discovered that he needed diplomatic representation in the academic world, and therefore sent a cable to his ministry saying, set up an academy, which they did. They did promptly in 1926. The academy is at present has about 55 members. It has by law in its own statute a capacity of 75, which it has never reached. My predecessors have always been very parsimonious in extending the privilege of membership to others. It is set up in 3 sections: natural sciences, social sciences, and arts and letters. Because the film we saw sort of spoke about that, the Academy of Athens is virtually 100% dependent on state support, financial support, notwithstanding the fact that it has in its own property a very large number, a huge portfolio exceeding 170 buildings or apartments or whatever, all of which, however, are dedicated to providing income for scholarships, and therefore are not, in fact, able to provide operating monies, and that creates a kind of a perennial problem of financial difficulties. It is an institution that I think enjoys the distant respect of its population, which population is, I will always have difficulty figuring out what exactly the Academy does. This is the usual introductory remark in any kind of a social gathering. You're a member of the Academy. What exactly do you do? And I think that very question is apposite for us, for our purposes today as well, goes to the heart of the matter. This is an institution that's revered, but remains distant from Greek society.
We'll examine that a little more as we go along.
By all means, please, let's do that.
Yep. Peter?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's working. So first of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be back in Athens, and what an honor it is to be part of the centennial celebration of the Gennadios Library. And being at the American School is something I enjoy very much. I have huge admiration for its history and its present. And I also feel a little bit like I'm encountering a long-lost twin whenever I'm here, because the American School was founded in 1881, as we saw, and in 1894, an American School for Classical Studies was founded in Rome, at the same time that an American School of Architecture was founded in Rome. And in 1911, the two institutions merged. By then, the American School of Architecture had itself been renamed the American Academy in Rome, and that was the name that was given to the merged institutions. It was a little bit of a shotgun marriage, since the American School had run out of money, and I think that's why it lost its name. But interestingly, the two entities remained as administrative parts within the overall institution of the American Academy in Rome, and were, I think, initially governed separately by their own heads of school, and only later in the 20th century did they lose that and become more vestigial, just administrative units. And those units themselves didn't disappear from our website. until about 10 years ago. So the merger was 1911, but the after effects didn't go away. Well, I would say they haven't gone away even to this day, and we can come back to that. But what is interesting is that Rome is a city full of academies. In a way, it goes back to the historical role of the city as the centerpiece of the Grand Tour. And starting with the French in the 1660s, other nations got the idea of creating basically a kind of caravanserai for their artists. And it is essentially artists who came to academies over the course of the 19th century, first with the Germans, then with the French, eventually with others. Institutes were set up. The Deutsches Archäologisches Institut was the first of them in 1821. And institutes were for the scholars, academies were for the artists. When the American Academy merged with the American School for Classical Studies, it became the first institution of its sort in Rome to have both artists and scholars under its roof. And that's something that I think is very important. And just one last observation on this. In 1930, a book that was published in Hamburg on the history of research institutes all over the world and going back in time as well, said that, in the chapter on the United States, said that there were no research institutes in the United States, but the only two that existed were the American School for Classical Studies in Athens and the American Academy in Rome. And what's interesting about that is the American School was founded as a school, not a research institute. The American Academy in Rome was the merger of artists and scholars, not in principle a research institute. They were seen as research institutes in 1930, and it was only later in 1930 that the Institute for Advanced Study was founded at Princeton, which really was the first American research institute. So there is a kind of moment where the Enlightenment Grand Tour meets the 20th century Research Institute, and that moment kind of runs through the history of our two institutions.
That's very interesting as an introduction. So now we'll move into the meat of the discussion. So I think we shouldn't point the microphones at each other otherwise. Yeah. So the discussion this evening will be in 4 sections. So the first one tries to examine what academies are for. So I'd like to ask you both this question. If you had to explain to a skeptical young person why academies still matter in the 21st century, what would you say?
So, you know, the question that you posed, Professor, about people not understanding what an academy is, I think is a very good jumping off point, because regardless of the history, how we got here, the fact is that academies were once obvious places. So if you have a new nation, the new nation needs an academy. But over the course of, let's say, the last 200 years, academies have been made, I would say, obsolete by the university. And I think the university accomplished that by specialization, by disciplines, by dividing knowledge into narrower boxes where it could be controlled and advanced. And that's great. We all benefit from universities. But academies do something different. It's precisely, I would say, the fact that academies don't have specialization. It's precisely the fact that academies, going back to the 16th century in Italy when they were first invented, really, Pace, Plato, You know, academies were also in society. They were in towns. They were not separated out. And I think those two functions remain vital today. The bridge between learning and the wider population, and the importance of pursuing questions across disciplinary boundaries. And I would say that's really where...
Sorry about that.
Where I think the future of academies lies.
Okay.
You can hear me. Okay, good enough. I would very much agree with your analysis on that. I would say, however, that in the Greek case, you have an almost exclusive focus on research and promotion of research. And then, on the other hand, the scholarship component, which is the large number of endowments we receive, in fact, mandate that we, in fact, distribute lots of scholarships. The link between the two is missing in the Greek Academy. It's one of its weaknesses, but it's also its role is very important in the sense that it is the major national institution for the promotion and diffusion, and diffusion becomes very important here, of knowledge. So my own presidency, I note parenthetically, I won't comment on it, but you'll appreciate it, the term of office of a president is 1 year, which means effectively you have 7 months to be able to do something. And I confess to not being able to produce a great deal of work in 7 months. But the fact is, the role of diffusing knowledge is very much a part of what the Athens Academy does. And my own personal concern as president was to seek to render the Academy more extroverted, to turn so towards the society, to be able to reach out, which is not necessarily a goal that all of my colleagues share. There's, I think, a very legitimate, bona fide view, which I don't share, that the Academy is ultimately an elite institution that will therefore engage in conversation with sister elite institutions and that need not necessarily be involved with society. I strongly disagree with that view, and I'm trying my very best to be able to promote it, within my own surroundings. So that's the current state of affairs in terms of the Academy of Athens, an institution that enjoys very significant diffuse legitimacy. Everyone thinks it's a great institution. If you ask them about it, they won't be able to tell you what it's about. And my goal is to be able to explain that better to Greek society by, in fact, opening up further towards the society.
So, before we get to the interrelationship between academies and society, as you mentioned the word elite, which has become a bad word these days, is there still room for the intellectual authority that these academies are supposed to represent? Whoever.
I mean, I think the only answer to that question, of course, in this setting has to be yes. But to go back to what Professor Diamandouros was saying, academies, as universities became places of analysis and interpretation, academies became places that produced famous author. And we see that all around Europe. That's what national academies have been doing. I think the question of audience is one that lies in the history of all of these institutions, but I think it will require a desire on the part of the institutions to find and to exploit that aspect of their histories. So, the elite character of election and membership, for instance, doesn't necessarily imply that the work or the events of the institution have to only be addressed to a narrow audience.
Let me expand on that. We have a juxtaposition here of a publicly financed institution by privately financed. So the European and American, different European and American traditions, which I think is very, very good for our purposes and your purposes. The Academy of Athens resembles, that will probably surprise you, resembles a very famous, at least among social scientists, excerpt from none other than Karl Marx, who in his own writings about the civil wars in France in the 1840s made a metaphorical reference to what he termed the working class. He said the working class very much resembles a sack of potatoes. If you look at it, as it is a sack, it has volume, it's impressive. Once you slice it, individual potatoes come out, and therefore it loses its weight. How is that relevant to our discussion? A celebrated member of the Academy, after he was celebrating his 100th anniversary, turned to me and said, "We're very much the same way. There are 45 at the time individual members and colleagues. We lack an esprit de corps. We lack cohesion." So the problem of the Greek Academy is, I think, very much a function of the formalism that is extremely important in Greek society, so that you have the formal acceptance and celebration of the stature of the Academy. You have the formal acceptance and celebration of individuals, each one of whom has an impressive record of scholarship, but as an institution, it has not been able to capture the imagination of the society at large, and has therefore remained distant and hesitant.
I mean, that's very interesting. I often think, as an institutional leader, that one of the ways to think through a problem is to try and understand what kind of function is not being fulfilled by other institutions. So in the case of academies, what is the kind of work that isn't being done? What are the kinds of events that aren't organized? What are the kinds of formats that are not being utilized? What are the kinds of topics that are not being discussed? What are the kinds of people, creative people, who are not being brought together in the existing institutions in your town, city, or state? And I think working backwards from that is one of the ways, within the general framework provided by the history of academies, is one of the ways to think about how the academy could, and I mean academy as a type, be a more vigorous and important agent in contemporary society.
Yeah, again, I appreciate the opportunity to expand on that one. A model for thinking about the academies and society is the term learned society. I note that in the United States, The humanities is very much represented by an entity called ACLS, which is the American Council of Learned Societies. Why is that important? Because it also conveys the original intent and conceptualization of what a learned society could do, and that has been transmitted, certainly in the Greek case, to the academy itself. So it's important to note that. The problem is, in our day and age, with enormous amount of technological change and rapidly changing accumulation of knowledge, is that a model that is up to snuff to be able to respond to contemporary challenges? I remain convinced that in the Greek case anyway, the Academy needs to, in fact, reach out. But reaching out has other implications, okay? Institutional kind of infrastructure, mentalities. I have colleagues with extraordinarily distinguished credentials who say to me very flatly, I don't need to interact with anyone else. I'm doing my research with my colleagues. I think that's not the way to go forward. And I think that that's the way to try and reinvigorate the role of the Academy by expanding beyond the learned society model and perhaps engaging very much, with other institutions, another important role of academies, international cooperation and diffusion of knowledge, which is extremely important. Okay. But that also has bureaucratic implications. To be able to reach out and to enter a network and to mobilize requires a great deal of infrastructure, which is not always necessarily there.
So I also agree that the connection to learned societies is a good way to fall into the trap of elites talking to elites. So I often feel, and I guess all of us who have the privilege of running old institutions often feel that we both suffer from and occasionally benefit from the histories of those institutions. And in my case, the accidental merger of 1911 between the artists and the scholars is, I think, the answer to Professor Diamandouros' point, because artists offer a way to not just reach a much wider audience than a learned society, but also offer a way of reinterpreting the learned world in a much more accessible form for the contemporary audience. And I think, therefore, it's, in the case of the American Academy in Rome, a singular piece of good fortune, not perfectly exploited by us up to this point, by no means, but a piece of good fortune that we have artists and scholars living and working under the same roof, because even without any institutional prompting, it's always the case that at a personal level, a particular artist and a particular scholar do things together over the course of their time. And that not only creates audience opportunities for us in Rome, but creates for them, the artists and the scholars, the model for things that they will do later in their professional lives back in the United States, for which audiences will then be generated in their places of residence. So I think there's a lot to be gained from and developed out of the conversations and the collaborations of artists and scholars.
So it's an interesting, you raise interesting issues, obviously. We've had this debate internally. It seems to me, on the one hand, you have to be able to command authority, expertise, and on the other hand, you have to be useful. And being useful. So I remember a discussion here years ago where when some of us were pushing to open ourselves up to a broader community, when the reaction was, and this was a discussion around social media, and there was a reaction which was entirely legitimate that said, what do we need social media for? We're a gated community. And you can see the semiology of fences around all these institutions. And increasingly it seems to me that to be useful, you have to open yourself up, which was part of the motivation for bringing music to this environment, you know, the role of the artist, basically. So I think it's a very important part of the conversation. And I think, you know, the other thing is that, you know, I think there's a real danger that these academies have become very distant from society at large, and yet these academies, and I want to come to the next thing, these academies should also be shaping civic values, you know, providing an example. So part of this, of course, is what do you teach and what do you communicate? And something that's so dear to all of us is the humanities and the social sciences. And how do they continue to remain? What's their role? How do we continue to make them significant? Professor?
Well, you're proposing something where I have complete agreement with you. In other words, I've spent my entire career in the social sciences. I've worked in the States at the Social Science Research Council, which was at all times linked to the ACLS model. So I'm very much of a believer in the need to be able to provide a humanities and social science perspective within any kind of an institutional setting, particularly when it comes to the pure sciences. I'm convinced that you cannot separate. You can certainly separate these sciences, but I think the role of an academy should be able to bring together these kinds of perspectives, so that you can enjoy the benefits of the advances in science. For example, we are right now witnessing an enormous and absolutely astounding development of the biological sciences. But that's exactly the point where you do need the humanistic perspective that you can get from the humanities and social sciences to be able to ensure that all these advances are in fact underpinned in one way or another by human values. So I'm very much in agreement with that perspective.
Likewise, as we all know, technology doesn't tell you how to use technology, and technology doesn't tell you how to live with technology. And that's precisely what the arts and the humanities have to teach all of us. And so there's an argument to be made, I think a very simple one, that the more technology we have, the more humanities we need. And I think more and more people, and the rollout of AI only, I think, accelerates this phenomenon, more and more people are coming to understand that technology brings certain conveniences, but also brings with it certain serious problems. And the problems are at the human level. I often like to think that the physicists and the applied mathematicians grabbed for themselves the thing they call complexity science, which was developed out of a desire to understand something like the weather, which turns out to be a fiendishly difficult thing to predict. Not that we had to spend lots of money to know that. In any case, the truth is that the humanities is the great complexity science, because human beings are more complicated than anything else. The only thing that might be more complicated than a human being is a group of human beings.
That's so if we all agree that we need academies, we need to also start talking a little bit about how we sustain these academies. And so the question I had for you is that given two very different financial support structures, state funding on the one hand, philanthropy and private benefaction on the other, how does that ultimately shape not only the institution itself, but also how they think?
For me, it's having lived the better part of my life abroad, and having the benefit of both the States and Greece, and also having lived for 10 years in the European Union, having the benefit of the United States and Europe. We're talking about two different models. Okay? The European model is much more state-related, and you have a range within that from ranging from the Anglo-Saxon and Nordic model, where civil society, and that becomes a critical term here, civil society is an integral part of the system that supports and promotes research, okay? And by extension, academies, etc., etc. On the other hand, you have the model of France, and certainly, not to take you too far away, Greece, which replicates the worst parts of the French authoritarian tradition in education, where you have total dependence on the state, so that the capacity to be able to promote research very much depends on the capacity to be able to persuade the state to, in fact, provide you with the wherewithal and all that. That has its advantages, but it has very severe disadvantages, and certainly that tends to devalue the importance of the private sector and of the civil society component, which is such a critically important part of the Anglo-Saxon model and also the American model.
Well, the price of that is anxiety, since working in philanthropy means you are in a constant pursuit, a little bit like Achilles and the tortoise, and the constant pursuit can take over the lives of institutions to their detriment. So there's on the one hand, the independent source of income is freedom, and that means institutions can be very creative, much more creative than institutions that are part of a state budget. But they are both subject to success or failure of philanthropy, and subject often to the whims of the donors, which may create conditions not structurally that different from dependence on the state.
Yeah, the critical word that you use is whims. Okay, and if you are at the mercy of the whim of the state, then obviously there are potential kind of downsides to this whole operation. I remain convinced that the future of the academies generally ought to be a judicious mixture of state support where it's available, provided that there is a strong component of the philanthropic tradition of the private sector.
I mean, I agree with that. The concern I have is very much a kind of contemporary concern. If what we are interested in with the future of academies is taking advantage of this kind of third space to connect learning, the humanities, with a wider audience, which I think we share, the risk is now that the state-funded component of academies could, insofar as academies are interested in reaching out to the population, then become a semi-propagandistic operation on the part of the state. And that seems to be, in these years, a much greater risk than it might have been 10 or 20 years ago.
I think in conversations that I've been having around this issue, I think also the nature and the motivation of donors is changing. So there seems, there's this kind of fine line between stewardship and control. And you can see, this sort of new generation of tech bros has not been as philanthropic as prior generations of wealthy individuals have been. And they also seem to be pursuing agendas with their money. And I think that's something that increasingly we have to face. But you're right. There is considerable anxiety in having to constantly raise money to do things. I think I have to say the stewardship here around these financial issues has been very good at maintaining an endowment that gives us an element of freedom. But then again, you see, things like exchange rates will have an impact on your ability. So I think, money, as I always say, money isn't someone else's problem. It's all of our problems. And we have to pursue this. But
can I just say, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about money and its impact. But it's also, I think, it's possible to do interesting things with limited amounts of money. And I think we may underplay the role of an institutional imagination in our thinking about what the future could look like. We tend to think of institutions as slow-moving, resistant to novelty, but that's not about money, right? That's about the people in institutions, and that can change even without greater sums of money being available.
Oh, indeed, you use the term institutional imagination. That's what I would see the role of an academy, of being able to generate these kinds of insights and then to also take it further and promoting it. And that's exactly where you don't need necessarily the money for it. Again, we cannot discount or forget the fact that in an age where there's increasing disparity of wealth, even in the so-called first world, the amount of money that goes into the humanities and social sciences is very small related to what is going in technology and the pure sciences, notwithstanding the fact that, again, I repeat, the biological and medical sciences are, in fact, very much not the way of the future, but a very big part of that future. So your point is very well taken. But again, that brings me back to my central argument, which is precisely for these reasons, we need the academies to be able, in fact, to promote a sense of the need for the diffusion of the donors in societies like this one in Greece, but in most of Southern Europe as well, where the model of funding and of philanthropy has been primarily influenced by the French tradition and very much the French Napoleonic code of the early 19th century, whereby the civil service, made up of individuals of significant expertise, an expertise-based kind of central mechanism, which does things for you, but tells you to please stay out. I will best determine what's best for you. That tradition is very powerful in France. It's very powerful in Southern Europe. It is clearly not the same in Northern Europe, and it's half and half in Germany. So you have this kind of different models that you have to kind of play with. Each one has its own weaknesses, its own strengths. That's why I keep coming back to this idea of the judicious mixture of the two models.
Yeah. Some of you may know the work of the Swiss artist Thomas Hirschhorn. And starting in the 1990s, he developed 4, he called them monuments, projects. One devoted, the first was to Spinoza in Amsterdam, one to Georges Bataille, one to Gilles Deleuze, and one to Antonio Gramsci. And these monuments were encampments that he built in rundown, poor neighborhoods in Amsterdam, outside of Paris, outside of Avignon, and in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, in New York. And the encampments were libraries devoted to the philosophers, around which he organized programming with and for the people in the neighborhoods. So imagine if some of these academies, whether it's the Academy of Athens or some of the academies in German Länder, where they have lots of these, actually undertook projects that weren't the collected works of Leibniz in so many volumes that it won't be finished for another 50 years, but actually took on themselves the project of talking about Leibniz, which lets you talk about history and calculators and mathematics and numbers in a rundown neighborhood of a German small city. And one could imagine that happening all around the world. That would be an opportunity for academies to show that learning wasn't just for elites, but actually learning could be useful for lots of other people. During the pandemic, to distract myself, I developed a very large grant project with an acquaintance who was an anthropologist. We didn't get the grant, but what it was about was something very similar, and the inspiration for it is an organization in Mumbai that was founded about 25 years ago called Pukar that came up with this brilliant idea that belonged to the person I was working with, Arjun Appadurai, to teach people in slums research skills so that they could identify their political rights to things like water or electricity or land, and then use them. And I think, trying to imagine how the skills of an academy could be deployed across society, this was a really interesting, to my mind, struck me as a really interesting example of how academies have this opportunity to do work in society that nobody is really paying attention to right now.
Sorry, go on.
Go on. Let me just again pick up, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. That brings us back, as far as I'm concerned, to the salience of social media these days. Because I will personally confess that when I was in the European Union and the whole pressure of social media started mounting, I was very diffident at the very beginning and chose to maintain a distance from that. I haven't given that up. I think the way to go is use it, but use it intelligently. The important point that I think that you made here is that as we try to move forward, yes, we do need to identify particular audiences to which we can go. The important thing is, again, that nowadays the need to use intelligent means of reaching out, in other words, the social media cannot be ignored in that. I'll give you a very important example in my mind. Back 10 years ago, I was in New Zealand for the World Congress of Ombudsmen, and my colleague and dear friend, the Ombudsman of England, Ombudsman is gender neutral. That person was a woman, but nevertheless, that's what she's. If the Ombudsman is, I'm told by the Swedes, it does not distinguish between genders. So this wonderful lady delivers a speech a few months after she has gained a major victory in the United Kingdom against a state that benefited millions of individuals and cost the state millions of pounds. The central message to us was, I developed a superb argument, I presented it to the state, and I won. Therefore, I thought I had accomplished my mission, and I was wrong, and she wants to say, because the state accepted the verdict, but then fought tooth and nail against its implementation. Social media is where it comes in, if intelligently used. Okay, but it's an enormously challenging opportunity. It requires skills. It requires knowledge. It's not to be taken fancifully, but I am convinced that certainly for this country, but in all the countries that I can think of, the intelligent exploitation of the opportunities given by social media needs to be factored in when you try to assign roles and responsibilities. And again, I come back and saying academies can do that.
In listening to this conversation, it strikes me that, and in thinking about the future, which is the last section, what seems to me key to all this is to be useful.
Yes.
Something as simple as that, and to always sort of come back to questioning whether what we do is useful. And being useful is what helps you raise money, it's what helps you remain relevant. And coming to the section about the future, we're living in a world of very rapid change. I think it's creating a lot of insecurity, a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. And I'm wondering what the role of the academy, what the role of authority is in this environment of rapid change.
Could I'm just going to push a little bit about the notion of useful.
Okay.
For many years, about 2 decades, I worked on an early 17th century French scholar who studied everything, published nothing. And he went down many rabbit holes, but he would always say that his work was for the public good or for the public utility. And what I came to realize is that there is that the notion of useful is one side of a coin, but the other side of it is really curiosity or openness. And you can define useful down to a very limited range of things, or expand it out to a much bigger range of things. And I think part of the peril of our time is the narrowing down of what's useful. And to go back to what we were talking about before, I think technology, the all-conquering advance of technology, actually could remind us that there's a much broader notion of useful that we all need, that goes beyond what our phones can do for us. And I think maybe part of what academies can do is to sustain that bigger notion of what counts as useful, which might in practice be about encouraging curiosity, encouraging people to explore, and not close down to a narrower notion of what's useful.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that the issue before us is how can we somehow marry usefulness with pragmatism in the sense of being fairly hard-nosed about the issues that are identified as important issues or social issues, and that is where the elite status of an academy can come in, be useful, because under normal circumstances, the academies enjoy a certain degree of legitimacy. They speak with a certain degree of authority, or at the very least, its members do that, and collectively they do. So the thing is, how do you take advantage of these, the benefits that accrue from this kind of constellation of individuals, and in countries, particularly countries that are centralized, as opposed to, let's say, operating at a federal level where you have multiple kind of constituencies. When you have a centralized bureaucracy in a centralized state, it's easier to be able to disseminate a particular way of approaching research and knowledge. And I think that this is where the diffuse but extremely important power of academies lies.
So I think we've touched on a very broad range of subjects, and I'd like to, knowing most of you, bring you into this conversation. Would you like to make a comment? Would you like to ask a question? Be courageous. Yes, go ahead.
I have a
Hang on, just one sec. Let me see. Go to the podium, although can't see. Go ahead.
I have a question for you guys. It was wonderful to hear this conversation. This topic is actually pretty close to my heart because I'm a composer. I'm here for the Sports Foundation residency. And one of the main subjects of my music is actually my experience as part of, poor American class. I have a very odd background from the school I come from, which is a Curtis Institute. I built on warehouses, I loaded aircraft, built cars, line cooking, fine dining. And something I've thought about a lot is how can I make my music useful, interesting, beneficiary to various coworkers I've had in these, jobs. And I guess one question I have for you guys is, how do you imagine bringing in, the demographics you're interested in benefiting with the work of an academy? And how would you inquire about what may be useful, right? We were talking about the concept of usefulness and just figuring out what may be useful to, specific communities and actual specifics and actionable things. That was kind of broad, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I will confess to not being particularly clear about your question.
One more time. I'm interested in how you guys imagine bringing in these communities that you may be interested in helping as academies into the conversation of usefulness and figuring out what may be useful.
Sorry, do you disadvantage?
Yeah. Maybe working class is a term we use. Poor working class communities, and having an academy be useful to them.
Yeah.
I mean, just to stay with the example I gave before of the Swiss artist, Thomas Hirschhorn, I mean, there, I think to abstract from what he did to answer your question, one is going to the place. I think that's really crucial. I mean, it's not just metaphorically about meeting people where they are, but actually literally meeting people where they are. I think that's crucial. The second is bringing resources to those places. In the case of Hirschhorn, he brought art materials and books and people, right? The third is patience, because there is inevitably going to be, let's call it, a threshold of suspicion. What is this thing? Why is it here? What does it want from me? What does it mean? And so I think patience. And then the last of the four, and I'm just making this up as we go, would be to think about, okay, what's the kind of programming that would be the best vehicle for the ideas that we want to communicate, or let's say the utility that we want to share with the population. And here, I am, perhaps woefully romantic and sentimental about this, but, I think about some of the books that I have read and taught to people, which, if you ripped off the cover, so you didn't know that it was written in whatever language it was, however many hundreds of years ago it was, speaks to the human experience. And I think there are ways to take the kinds of fancy stuff that academies are so good at studying and producing, and actually cut to the core of why those ideas, people, objects have remained so powerful, and to communicate them. And I'm a big believer that there's no serious, important idea that cannot be communicated to anyone. It's just a question of how much energy and brain power you put in to thinking about how to get it across.
Anyone else? Yes?
The critical part of this answer to you is the mode of communication. How do you communicate? And what do you decide to make your own responsibility? In other words, if you take an attitude that this is not for me, because I happen to be a member of the academy and therefore of an elite and all that, that is destructive. If you do take the opposite view, which is because I'm a member of an elite, I have an increased social responsibility to be able to reach out and to communicate, then you're, I think, in the right path.
Marta, just a sec.
Just about the content that exists inside of academies and how it is very exclusive, because it's not accessible. So what can be done to make content inside of the academy more accessible, such as digitizing, and to what you said, Dr. Diamantouros, and was about capturing the imagination, and you, Dr. Miller, about the institutional imagination. And I think that to do that, there must be the repurposing of the content that exists within these archives. How to do that is to change scale or to change the form of it in some way, and to deliver it to a larger audience. Could you talk a little bit about your thinking behind this?
Sure. It's not a matter of scale. Although obviously scale can come in, particularly if we integrate again the social media approach to it, okay? For me, the challenge arises out of the intellectual accommodation or acceptance on the part of the members of the Academy to issues that are not purely theoretical or abstract. It's very difficult to be able to get individuals, who are the average age of the members of the Greek Academy, and I'm not making a statement generally, is early 80s. That creates a significant kind of obstacle in communicating with younger generations. Part of my self-assigned agenda for this year is precisely to be able to reach out to younger generations and exploring ways of doing it. So it's not a question of scale, it's a question of how you identify your audiences and then how do you approach them. Social media can be an instrument, but you have to have a vision on that one. And that, for me, as far as I'm concerned, is the social relevance of the questions that you pose to yourself.
There's so many questions. Okay, let's make them brief so we don't lose people. Go, Fiona, please.
I have a question which goes a little bit in the direction that the lady just mentioned, but it is my feeling that because of the development of technology, we have here a problem of role models. The role models are fragmented and falling apart. Academies symbolize something which has to do, as you say, with the state, as you say, with the development of institutions. And by the way, the Academie der Wissenschaften in Berlin is very much interested to go down and to really do big programs for people and to open it to society. But I have the feeling that there is a problem with role models. What does an academy as a role model represent today? What is its relativity? So I think this discussion should be much broader into society. It certainly does not take place in the Greek society, certainly. I live in Germany. I have the feeling that it is much more present in the German society concerning many traditions, but it's my feeling that we have a fragmentation of role models in general, whether it's academies, genders, families, or whatever. So I just would like to.
So I think if we could just have the questions and then group them together at the end. Sir, in the white suit. Yeah.
Thank you both speakers and moderators for what I consider to be a very inspiring discussion. Just a quick question. Professor Miller referred rather briefly to artificial intelligence at one point. What do you see the effect of the development of artificial intelligence on the future role of academies in society? Is it an opportunity or is it a threat?
Okay, that it? One last question, and then yes.
Professor Diamandouros, as former director of the Research Center for Astronomy of the Academy of Athens, back then I had proposed that all the research centers would organize a series of speeches for the public and the Academy to be open to the public and to the community. Unfortunately, this proposal was not accepted. Only Professor Kondopoulos, who was in head of our department, consented. And so for 1 year, we had every other Wednesday, the public coming and listening to astronomy speeches for the public. And this, I think, is a very nice way. And you saw, Professor Diamandouros, that a few days ago, when you organized about the artificial intelligence, how many people came. We didn't even have seats enough for them to sit. Thank you.
Okay, so concluding remarks, role models, AI, reaching out to the public.
Right. I think the, things that seem like disadvantages can often be advantages. The fact that people don't know what an academy is a fantastic opportunity for academies to reinvent themselves in the proportion and shape of what is needed in the moment. In terms of role models, I think opening up academies for people to come in is half the job. It's a great thing. I'm not against it. But the full job would be for academies to turn over their curating to organizations that are outside of the academy, younger people, organizations that are not primarily concerned with erudite topics, and that would be a way of let's say, leveraging the authority, the social media authority, the influencer authority, to bring people into academies to see reflected the kinds of work done there, but reflected in completely accessible formats and with people in the audience whom they want to be with. And the question about AI, the too easy answer would be to say it's both an opportunity and a threat. But I guess the more substantive answer I would give is that if you know something already, AI is a great amplifier and lets you do more. The danger, of course, is that AI becomes, it supplants, it replaces the effort that all of us had to make at some point, and continuing hopefully in our lives, to know something. And if you don't know anything, then obviously AI becomes a threat to us all.
Beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, very much agree with that one. Let's just put it this way. AI can be an extraordinarily powerful tool, but it's still a tool nevertheless. And it therefore poses a challenge to us, even though an AI may be a winner in a confrontation between assisting kind of an individual, a human being and all that. The issue here is, how do you develop strategies, mental strategies, approaches of intelligently using the enormous capacity that AI has and channel it towards socially beneficial rules. I'll take the question of role models. Certainly, the academies can assume a role model. The lady in the back who referred to the meeting we had the other day on AI and in the academy, we had a very large turnout. I think it's a case in point. Why? Because it was well developed, it was well programmed, but at the same time, it also touched upon a topic that is very much goes to the heart of what we're facing right now. I'll give you a counterexample. In my programmatic speech, when assuming my office this year, I identified 5 fields that I consider to be of central concern to Greek society, okay? Starting with the model of the governance model of Greece, going to education, which I think is the central concern we have and challenge in Greece, on to demographic decline, onto the climate change, and last but not least, cutting across all of these AI. It was very interesting for me that AI attracted a very large audience, and the launching conference on the model of governance in Greece attracted very few people. Okay. And the issue is, conceivably, we did not work hard to be able to disseminate the information. I doubt that. But it has to do with the relevance of and the pragmatic aspects of a topic that's very difficult to, in fact, convey. What is the model, the governance model in Greece for the average Greek citizen? I would take responsibility for saying we failed to convey in more concrete terms, down-to-earth terms, what this entailed, and we need to be able to revisit it. So I accept the challenge of role models for the Academy, but it also entails a significant shift in the approach, in approaching these matters, that entails a shift in value systems. The dominant value system in Greece is essentially a value system that promotes conflict, that privileges conflict, and shies away from compromise I see very many ladies here, but I will tell you that in Greek, the term for the individual that is not prepared to compromise is being given has a very positive value to it, okay? Ο ασυμβίβαστος. Ασυμβίβαστος in Greek conveys the male-dominated approach to not being able to take, any kind of an argument and go against it. But it also expresses a value system that, in fact, disparages compromise and the search for middle solutions. So role models are important precisely because if you don't shift value systems, you won't be able to generate the appropriate role model. Okay, thank you.
I hate to bring the evening to an end, especially when we touch a topic that's so fascinating. Professor Diamandouros, Professor Miller, thank you very much for a wonderful evening, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So please join us downstairs for a reception, and we can continue discussing these issues. Thank you very much.